I'm Jack Taylor. Welcome. And we are delighted to welcome Chuck Schaden. You know, he's the old-time radio guy. Those were the days, and Metro-Goldwyn memories, and all of that kind of thing.
Metro-Goldwyn memories.
Did I say Golden?
You said Goldwyn.
I did.
No, see, they kind of copied from us.
Is that right? Metro-Goldwyn memories.
Right.
How are you?
I'm just fine, Jack. Pleased to be here today.
People who have not met you before expect you to be an old-timer because you deal in old-time radio?
Yes.
But you're not.
Well, I've been around. I listened to those radio shows as a youngster. I grew up with them.
When did you get into this and how?
Well, I started as a fan. I started collecting old-time radio shows back in the middle 60s.
Where did you get them?
Any place I could find them. I found somebody who put out a record with some clips of radio shows, so I wrote them a note, and they sent me back a list of programs that they had that they were selling. So I started to buy some of these tapes, and it got rather expensive, but I thought I had died and gone to radio heaven, because the shows had all been off the air for so many years. They were gone, and I was so pleased to listen to them again. Grand Central Station and Fibber and Molly.
That's a hobby.
It was a hobby. And then in 1970, I felt that if you have a hobby, you want to share it with someone. And we used to have people come over to our apartment on a Saturday night, and we'd sit around for a few hours, and instead of watching television, I'd make them listen to radio shows. And they enjoyed it, but after a while, you know, it's real hard to listen to radio in a group. A radio is very personal. A radio is a real personal thing. So what you do is you want to listen to it while you're doing something else. And that's very nice to be able to do that. So I thought if I could get on the radio itself with some of these old shows, it would be a real nice extension of the hobby. And I found a little station in Evanston. It was WNMP. Which within the year changed its call letters to WLTD, and I found a nice little Saturday afternoon time slot, 1 o'clock till 4 o'clock, interrupted by news and sports and things like that. Well, we started playing the old-time radio shows, and that's where it began.
What year was that?
1970. In May of 1970 is when we started with it. So we've been on for over 28 years now playing the old-time radio shows. And 5 years after we started, we moved to WNIB, where we are still broadcasting on Saturdays at 1 o'clock.
1 till?
1 until 5.
1 until 5, right? Saturday on WNIB. Of course, one of the problems with old-time radio was the recording devices weren't very good in the early days. When I began in radio in the late 40s, we didn't have tape recorders. And then came the wire recorder, which had a lot of problems. But they made transcriptions at that time, and when we had to record a program for some reason or another, the big platter was put on the recording device. It was glass, and the cutting diamond needle made grooves in it and so on and so forth. And then the quality of it was pretty scratchy, and it wasn't very good and so on. So I suspect many of the shows from the 20s and 30s were not recorded, or if so, not very well.
Well, they were recorded for a variety of reasons, but never with the thought they were going to be rebroadcast. Someone with the program, someone with the network, someone with the agency wanted to have a copy of the show, and so then they made a recording. But you have to understand that recordings that were made they were just made one at a time. They cut the record and they gave the record to someone. They had been making commercial records for a number of years in the 20s and the 30s and so forth. But this was one at a time where the engineer would be, you know, sweeping away the acetate that would be peeling off of the disc as it turned around. And so they made these things and they gave it to whomever wanted it, whoever ordered it, and then that was it. And so a lot of those were lost. They were done on a glass base. They were done on an aluminum base. But a lot of those things did not survive. And during World War II, a lot of those aluminum-based recordings, and these were large 16-inch transcription discs, very large records, they went into the war effort in the scrap drives. They needed aluminum. And so they took those away. And then they recorded on a glass base. They took a piece of glass put the shellac or the enamel or the vinyl over it, and would do it that way. But then that was very, very fragile, and many of those would be broken and shattered to bits. But during the war, the Armed Forces Radio Service was providing entertainment to our servicemen and women around the world, and they made vinyl recordings, and they pressed them just like you would in a recording studio. And these were 16 inchers, and the 16-inch disc playing at 33 1/3 RPM, but not with the microgroove that came along into the 1950s. And so you had a big record that played 15 minutes on each side. And Armed Forces Radio would take the stateside radio broadcasts, edit out the commercials, because the fighting men didn't need to hear the old commercials, or I shouldn't say old commercials, but they didn't need to hear the commercials. And of course, sometimes it was for products that were not available to the military audience. So anyway, they made a recording of the show, and then a pressing of that recording, and shipped it out all over the country, all over the world, to the Armed Forces Radio Service stations. And the government somehow has a directive that says, do not destroy anything unless you get a directive to destroy it. And sometimes the directive to destroy was never forthcoming. And a lot of Armed Forces Radio Service stations across the world had storage rooms filled with these 16-inch transcription discs of programs. And in the 1950s, someone would walk into a closet marked "No Admittance" in a radio station somewhere in Japan maybe. And they walked in and they looked and they saw this whole long row, shelves and shelves of big records. What are these records? And they'd go up and they'd pull one off the shelf and they'd look at it and say "Inner Sanctum," and they'd put it back and they'd pull another one out and they'd look at that and they would say "I Love a Mystery," push it back, and it would say, you know, "My Friend Irma," or "The Life of Riley," or "Fibber McGee and Molly." And then with that, there we had a little treasure trove of radio shows. And some of those records ultimately were liberated by the GIs and brought back to this country and moved into the circulation of the collectors, the fans, like myself, of the radio shows. And so we, if there was anything worthwhile coming out of World War II, it was the fact that these radio shows were saved, because stateside, when the shows were broadcast, they were all done live. They did not have any interest at all in recording these shows for rebroadcast. In the case where a special show would be broadcast, for example, at Christmas time. It was a wonderful script, a warm-hearted seasonal script, and the audience loved it and expected that show to be repeated the next Christmas. It would be repeated, but they'd get the script out and the cast would redo it live. And if there were changes in the cast, there would be some changes in the story and the script, and then they would do it that way. So we didn't have that preservation in mind.
We usually hear those were the days on WNIB when we're in the car. Mm-hmm. And not long ago, we were on some little trip and listened to U.S. Steel Hour of Mice and Men.
Oh, yeah.
And what a superb presentation it was.
Burgess Meredith.
And I said to my wife, listen to that, of Mice and Men, Burgess Meredith. Phenomenal radio. Now we have Mancow Muller.
Well, radio has changed an awful lot.
And not for the better.
Well, it depends on your point of view. In my point of view, it hasn't changed for the better. You know?
Right. It has. The difference was, of course, radio was then what television is today in terms of the networks. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. That was where the advertising dollars went. That was where the creative talent went. That was where the major talent went, and that's where the big effort was. When television came in, radio thought its number was up and they were out of business. Radio stations were practically given away, and then they found out they could coexist, but in a different format, with music and talk and the kind of thing we have now. But nobody, I guess, would try to do Of Mice and Men with major stars the kind of money and time and whatnot that and it's unfortunate. Some of that stuff holds up. I remember hearing on your show the Burns and Allen.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Just nothing on the air today is any funnier or more timely. Holds up beautifully. Some of that stuff is really evergreen.
Oh,
wonderful.
Yes. Well, you know, the radio of the past, the golden age of radios, which they could have had a life beyond the television debut if the TV networks were not the same owners as the radio networks. In other words, the NBC and CBS and so forth, they owned radio and they moved into television. If it had been different ownership for the television networks, then radio would have found a competitor there and would have had to keep going and kept moving, and we might have had drama and comedy, maybe different. We might not have had the personality comedy like Eddie Cantor and Jack Benny and Fred Allen continue, but we probably would have had more situation comedy, more comedy situations of that nature, and great drama and mysteries and all of that sort of thing, because it was relatively inexpensive.
Sometimes I listen to some of the old Benny shows and the Bob Hope shows and so on, and I think, what did we think was so funny about that? I really think today's humor is by and large is more of an edge, and I'm not an advocate of blue humor or the stuff that is dirty, but I heard one of your Eddie Cantor shows the other day, and I thought, I don't know, that mediocre, I thought, really.
Well, some of it doesn't hold up. Some of it is topical and doesn't hold up. I don't think Eddie Cantor wears real well over the years. In fact, Bob Hope, a lot of his stuff doesn't wear well over the years. But Bob Hope was very topical.
Yeah.
And so was Eddie Cantor, so was Fred Allen. Very, very topical humor. And in order to appreciate the comedy, you kind of have to know what else is going on around the world and in the United States.
Allen had an edge. Remember he said Jack Benny couldn't ad-lib a burp?
Well, he's you know, and
I think the radio, the old-time radio for me, the drama is where it really excels. Mm-hmm. And some of the old shows like I Love a Mystery and One Man's Family, some of those things, you know, radio is, as has been said, the theater of the mind, and you can construct in your mind's eye better sets than Hollywood can do. And,
right.
And some of the mysteries and whatnot were just marvelous. And I think you are sort of an oasis in that vast wasteland that Minnow he was talking about television. Yeah. But you know, if you want to hear some really quality things, we recommend your show. Those were the days.
Thank you very much.
Did you, were you disappointed when you left WBBM?
No, I left WBBM on my own because I had done 10 years of 7 nights a week old-time radio on WBBM, and before that I'd been on...
You were there live, huh?
No, I pre-recorded the program.
Okay. I thought the hours were...
Well, it was... Well, you would go into the studio and record a week's worth of programs in one day, and I recorded in real time because I felt I needed to listen to the program to actually talk about the program. And prior to the BBM project, I was on other stations besides WNIB all the time. And I thought, one day I smelled some roses, and I thought, gee, they smell pretty good. I wanted to sit back a little bit and take a little more time, so I have been, for the last 2 years now, confining my interest in old-time radio and broadcast stuff to the Saturday afternoon show. And I love it because we can take it's a 4-hour broadcast. It's a leisurely trip. We're not concerned with news or weather.
So you're there live?
We're live. We broadcast from the Museum of Broadcast Communications at the Chicago Cultural Center on Michigan Avenue at Washington Street. And it's open. The studio's open to the public. You can come in, see our show for a little while if you like. You can stay all the afternoon if you like. But basically, we're playing tapes of the radio shows, so we talk a little bit in between.
Are you at your store very much?
Not as much as I used to be. I'm in and out a little bit, not on any regular basis, but...
what do people buy there?
They buy radio tapes. They buy tapes of the old radio shows. We carry the vintage...
What do they cost?
You can buy a single tape for $6.95. You can buy a half a dozen tapes for $24.95.
You're going to do any TV today? Phil Rosenthal of the Sun-Times writes about the cable channels where you can see Edward R. Murrow's documentaries and What's My Line, and he's of the opinion that many of those early game shows are better than what's on now. You going to do any old-time TV?
No, I don't think. I'd like to. I used to think that I'd like to do Those Were the Days for television, where you would take a single episode, talk about it, point out some of the characters. Well, you know, Lucy is running constantly. It's on. I think what we'd like to see would be some of the more obscure shows, but I'm not auditioning. I don't particularly want to do that. I did a cable TV show a few years ago, and we did a 1-hour show every month. And I realized that what you have to worry about is the picture. Boy, it's hard to find a picture for everything that you want to do. And with radio, you know, you sit back and the picture's in your mind. See, with radio, the listener is a participant, is an active participant, because he has to supply the pictures. With television...
Stick to radio, huh?
I'm going to stick to radio, I think. Yeah. Except I'm delighted to be here.
You're doing all right here today.
Thanks.
Just the fee is probably not all that you'd hope, but...
Well, it's okay.
I'm going to buy a cup of coffee later.
That's great.
Chuck Schaden, owner-founder, Metro Golden Memories, and he's the producer and host of Those Were the Days, Saturday afternoons 1 to 5 on WNIB. And we wish you continued good luck.
Thank you very much. Pleasure to be here.
Very much.
Thanks,
enjoy
Jeff.
what you do.
Me too. Enjoy what you do.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Chuck Schaden. I'm Jack Taylor. This is the Stock Market Observer.
When you think limo, think else.
Yes, when you think limo, think